Good morning, it's Mr. Michelin here, and this is the first of two very quick videos on cells and the parts of a cell. And it's also got just the last part of microscopes that we need to go through. Okay, so in this topic of microscopic world, you've had a go at using a microscope, you've had a go at making your own slide and looking at things under the microscope. And the last thing that we did was to have a look at onion cells under a microscope. And so what I want to do today is I want to finish off talking about microscopes. There's not a great deal to go there. And then I want to talk about, well, all right, the cells that we had a look at, well, what actually is a cell? What does a cell do? And what are some of the broad categories that we break cells into? And what are some cell parts? Okay, so we're going to cover that over two very quick videos. So this is going to be about microscopes, cells, and cell parts. Let's finish off the microscope bit. So you've had a go at using a microscope in class. We've had a few classes. You've looked at lots of different things under a microscope, and we've stained a slide to try and make some of the things a bit more obvious under the microscope. And the microscopes that we used at school are called light microscopes because we shine light through the thing that we're trying to see. So we shine light through the specimen. We can stain the specimen to make stuff like the inside of a cell and some of the cell parts more obvious. Okay, and the ones that we've been using are called, I suppose, monocular microscopes because they've got one eyepiece. Okay, so you look down with one eye. You can also have what's called a stereo microscope, which means the eyepiece has one for each eye. Okay, so you look down with both eyes, like I said, binoculars, I suppose. And light microscopes, look, the ones we use at school are pretty good. We can get up to about 1,500 times magnification. After that, the picture just becomes it just becomes too hard to really see what's going on. Even with a very, very thin sample at this level of magnification, something that looks very thin to the eye suddenly becomes very thick under the microscope, and we start seeing multiple different levels, and it becomes very hard to focus. All right, so some of the limitations of a light microscope are, well, we have limited magnification. You do need light, but look, they are cheap, and by cheap I mean relatively speaking. So for a good light microscope, you're talking about $600. Anyone can really use it. So come back here. There we go. Anyone can use. You can view live stuff. So if you have a look under the microscope at like some pond water, you can actually see some of the bits and pieces, like little insects and little sort of organisms that are still alive, and they will wriggle across the screen. So you can actually view living things. All right. So a light microscope, they're cheap. Anyone can use it. You can view live stuff. But you're limited on your magnification, and you need to have a thin sample. If it's not thin, you can't see through it. The other type of microscope is called an electron microscope. And what an electron microscope does is it fires a beam of electrons at a specimen. Now, an electron microscope, because you're firing a beam of electrons at it, you can get down to huge magnifications. You can probably go up to about 5 million magnification, which means you can look at stuff at the atomic scale. So a real big advantage of electron microscopes is you can get down to the very, very small scale. You can see it in very clearly too. So the resolution is amazing. A really good Mr. Michelin, you can't spell. Here we go. So the resolution, that's better, is excellent. However, they are extraordinarily expensive. We're talking several $100,000, probably at a minimum. So they're horrifically expensive. And you can't look through an electron microscope. It doesn't have an eyepiece. You actually need to connect it up to a computer to view your sample. Your sample cannot be a living. So you couldn't look at a sample of pond water under an electron microscope and see the stuff wriggling about. It would all have to be dead. Okay, so these are the two different types of microscopes we have. We have light microscopes and we have electron microscopes. So be aware of what are the advantages and disadvantages of both. Let's move on to the next section, which is cells. So all I want to do here is just talk about what is a cell and what are the two broad categories that cells fall into. Cells are. So cells are, let's rub that out here. There we go. That's better. Cells are the smallest living pieces of life. Okay? And sometimes they're referred to as the building blocks of life. The building blocks of life. So if you took a cell, a cell is the smallest independent living thing. Okay, so the smallest thing that makes up everything are atoms, but atoms aren't alive. A cell is the smallest living thing, and you can have things that are only made up of one cell. So you can have what are called unicellular organisms, and they're made of a single cell. So things like bacteria are unicellular, made of a single cell. You can also have organisms like us, which are multicellular. And a multicellular organism is made of many cells. And I suppose depending on the size of the object, would say how many cells it makes up. So for example, with a human being, we are made of trillions and trillions of cells. Okay? More than you could possibly count. And while cells, there are many different types of cells because they all do different jobs, and we'll talk about that another day. Cells fall roughly into two very broad categories. We have, I suppose, what you call complex and not very complex. So let's start with the complex. Your complex cells are called eukaryote. And your not very complex are called prokaryote cells. So we have eukaryote cells and prokaryote cells. Prokaryote cells are very, very simple. Okay, they're probably one of the first ones to appear on the planet. And when we talk about cell parts, we'll see that, okay, prokaryote cells have limited organelles, and they don't have what's called a nucleus, which is quite important for cells to function. And so, pardon me, and so bacteria really are the only ones that fall into this category. Okay, so this is your bacteria. Having said that, bacteria are an abundant, or is a very, very large category of organisms. Okay, so it's not as if, well, we've only got one category of things that's prokaryotes, which means there isn't many of them. Bacteria are everywhere, so prokaryote organisms are still quite abundant. Eukaryote have our complex organelles, which we'll talk about in the next video, what that means. They have a nucleus. So we're talking about plants, we're talking about animals, we're talking about the group fungi, and the Protactista group, which is basically everything that doesn't fit into plant, animal, or fungus, or bacteria. Okay, so cells are the smallest living pieces of life. They're the building blocks of life, and their size is, we're sort of not talking about meters or millimeters, we're talking about micrometers, which is 1/1,000,000th of a meter, which is pretty small. We can have unicellular organisms, which are made up of a single cell. We can have multicellular organisms, which are made of many cells. And cells are basically divided into two broad categories. We have not very complex cells, which are called prokaryote, which means they have very limited organelles, no nucleus, and this is mainly made up of bacteria. So bacteria are an example of something with a prokaryote cell. And we have more complicated cells, which are called eukaryote. So these have complex organelles, which we'll talk about. They have a nucleus. So plants, animals, fungus, and Protactista all have eukaryotic cells. So that's it for this video. And we'll go on to the next video, which is cell parts. Thank you.